two things that we've discovered that really help. Our son used to be a very picky eater, and he's 7.5. He's gotten so much better. And one thing, I always cooked with him, but one thing he really likes is when we set out what he calls a buffet, but really it'll be like, the best example is like if we made tacos, instead of composing the plate for him, I'll put it all on the table. We sit down as a family every night, and then he can choose what he wants. And sometimes it's just the white rice and the tortilla, but sometimes he'll try some lettuce or some tomatoes or peppers or something, and that has helped with him. The other thing I wanted to share is we learned through occupational therapy that proprioceptive input is really important. And so when he gets really dysregulated, and sometimes before bed, if he cannot calm down into his body, I'll do what's called we call arm squeezies, and squeeze down his arm and down his fingers, and it immediately starts to calm him down, and he can then listen to the book and focus for sleep.
It's very true. And that deep pressure, so there's lots of different sensory inputs and outputs, but that deep pressure is something that a lot of kids need, that heavy weighted blanket, or they'll run up and be like, I just need a hug, right? Or they'll run into your belly and you're like, okay, what do you, right? Like that deep compression is really helpful. That's a great tip. What's your question, love?
So my question is, do you feel like it is possible to acquire the support in a public school setting to truly support children with ADHD brains?
Oh, that's kind of a loaded question. So I think public schools do their very best, depending on what district you're in. They are set to certain guidelines and expectations, and I think it's the teachers within the school that make the difference. And teachers try their very best, but I think there's more teachers that are educated on ADHD, and then there's some that's not. I have seen a lot of successful cases of students in public schools with ADHD, and then I've seen a lot of cases that are not. I really think that COVID played a big role in how our poor public schools are functioning now, with just the increase of amount of services that are required, and then just the availability of teachers. So I don't think it's can't give you a straight answer on that. I think there are some schools that work really, really hard to think out of the box. I think Yarmouth is one of them. They try really hard to think out of the box and support their kids. And then there's other school systems that do the same thing. It's the lack of knowledge, lack of resources, and lack of funding. And sadly, it comes down to money.
Yeah.
Your services for your kids, it comes down to money and what's available.
I'll let someone else go.
Any questions online? You guys are so quiet. My online crew usually like chats me up. You can take your mic off. You can talk. Go for it. You can turn your camera on, talk. I'm all about that. Reagan, do you want to say something, love?
Yeah, I was just going to thank you. It's a really great presentation. It's really helpful. I have a son who has absence epilepsy and Asperger's, and he has definitely some executive functioning.
Yeah.
That was sort of our journey into his ASD diagnosis.
Yep.
And we have tried to continue to focus with the school on executive functioning, and they tend to really focus on getting him organized, making sure he does his homework, and what's a priority. Things that are less supported are things like his metacognition and his ability to want to get involved in extracurricular activities, like
right.
that goal directed interactions. And I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts are there in terms of how schools approach executive functioning and trying to get them to really see more of the whole child, and going beyond just organization when it comes to executive functioning deficits. And then I guess my only other thing is the other thing that we're running into is the school is really reluctant to give him graphic organizers and things because they're worried he's in middle school. they seem really worried about just like stigma.
Yep.
And and this seems to be especially in the middle school. We didn't run into this as much in elementary school.
Those wow. So one, I'm sad to hear that because we use graphic organizers all the time in our middle school and high school, and those graphic organizers are like key to their neurodevelopment and just being able to, because they're so visual, right? And to answer your question about executive functioning in school systems, for a long time, it's all been about organization, how to keep them organized, because that's what allows them to get their homework passed in, to keep their grades up, right? And so organization has been a very big focus. So when we think about that metacognition and emotional control and those types of things, that's usually what a guidance counselor or social worker is going to take over, right? And so I've yet to see, and maybe I'm anxious to maybe chat with Lindsay a little more. There's not a lot of programs that I've seen that focus on the 12 areas of executive functioning in the school system. And we're just starting to get a lot of people that want to be trained in executive functioning to support within a school system, but it does come back down to funding, right? How can they bill for that? How can they make money off that, right? And it needs to be somebody that maybe has an IEP that they can put those services in. But in general, it is about organization and helping put strategies in to help within the classroom for them to be successful. Lindsay said if you give the graphic organizer to everyone, then you eliminate the stigma. Absolutely. Yeah. But at the same time, if your child doesn't feel any stigma from it, right, and that's their tool, then they should be allowed to use it, right? And you're kind of worrying about something that hasn't come to for fruition, right? So, and that goes back to a child needs to have what works for them. It isn't a one size fits all. Everybody has individualized organizational strategies as well as breaking things down. I can guarantee, I have a high schooler that is a junior this year, and if I took away his graphic organizer, he would have no idea how to break his writing and his essays down. So there's so many ways to like use those skills. I hope in the future that we can embrace a program that in the school system that allows to just have one class that everybody goes to every year, just like an elective, that helps them with executive functioning, because every age needs it, right? Whether you have neurodiversity or any type of, your brain works differently, right? We all could benefit from those strategies. So to answer I hope that answers your question, love.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful, and I appreciated what you said about the writing, because I think that's something that we're struggling with, and we're struggling with the math. We started struggling with the math since we've gotten into middle school. So I think certainly it's been helpful. I just wondered if you're familiar with the sort of executive functioning track at Proctor Academy in New Hampshire.
I am not.
Yeah, they are a day school and a boarding school, and they have sort of this executive functioning track, and we're just trying to find, we're excited to have heard about WHILDE, but also just trying to find other schools in Maine that have a similar track.
So we do executive functioning every day in our school, and then every Monday morning, every class makes a daily goal and a weekly goal for themselves. And then we try to help them work on that. But also we look at, when the student comes in, we do a blueprint with them, and then we get to figure out what their executive functioning strengths and weaknesses are. And then we make an individualized plan for them that every teacher knows about. And we're working on those executive functioning skills all the time with them. So it's like full immersion versus just like a once a week kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for telling me about that. I'm going to look that up. Aaron, I see yours. Okay, you have a 5-year-old son, is not interested in setting goals for himself. I could get that at 5, and wants to regress to a younger age. Any tips on helping him move forward? Oh, well, that is a tricky one. At 5 years old, love, I think that's kind of hard to set goals, but you could set it as like a reward system in some ways. I'm not a huge person on like, it's like finding that carrot, right? You want to think about what's something that he really wants to learn. Like not wanting to dress himself or potty training. That's tricky. Um, I would look at, is there a sensory component to that? Because a lot of times when it comes down to dressing or potty training, it has something to do with control and sensory regulation. Not so much not wanting to perform the task. There's something that's holding him back for that. Because potty training is something that the muscles are contracting. So one, he's either not feeling it or he doesn't like the feeling of what's going on. And then dressing, one tip I give out to parents is having them set out you have little buckets, they're Monday through Friday. You can even do it up to Sunday. And on that Sunday night, you put every outfit in that bucket. And then it doesn't matter how long it takes. If it puts on backwards or what have you, make sure you give yourself enough time in order to allow that transition to happen. But if you want some more tips on that, let me know, because I think there's more around that than just not wanting to do those tasks for you. He's probably, or she, he is probably not doing those for a very specific developmental reason. Thank you for sharing that though, Erin. Anyone else? Yeah, love.
So we have a 9-year-old, he's in 4th grade right now.
Yep.
And I'd say this is kind of the first year where it's been, I guess, crossed at least my mind, and I know Asians too, like more than once, where it's like, well, is this really the best place for him right now? Like he's really starting to show signs of struggles this year.
Yeah.
But we're still at a point where we like the school he's at. He has his friends. He fits well. So we've talked about going about maybe getting an IEP.
Yep.
But I think I'm struggling with how to begin that process.
That's a really daunting process.
Yes.
So the IEP process, what I'd say to you, if you go through this process, once you get it, don't let it slip, because it's a daunting process. So it takes 45 days to get all the testing done. So the school that you go to will do their own academic testing on him, and they'll do a neuropsych eval to figure out how his brain processes. And if he ends up having a diagnosis, or if he currently has one, is it affecting his growth and his learning? So if it's affecting, right, and they can track where it is affecting and he's not at par where he should be based on his age, then the IEP team will come to you and say, these are the things we recommend putting into strategy. As parents, you're not educators, right? And so that process is like, okay, I'm going to take your word for it, right? Something I would recommend is, before you take their word for everything, do your due diligence and have somebody else just kind of talk to somebody else about it. Schools always have the best intentions, but there's only so much money, right? And so making sure that those strategies put in an IEP are actually going to help the progress and the growth of the student. And I've seen some really bad IEPs and I've seen some really good IEPs. After 45 days, you have 90 days to kind of create a good plan. And then after that, in Maine, it's one of the only states, a parent actually does not need to sign the IEP for the IEP to be put in process. So you don't actually have to agree with the IEP, but the school can put it in process. If you sign it, then you've agreed to it. So just make sure that when you go through that process, that you have some knowledge of what really might work for your son, and can they provide that environment for them.
Can I ask sort of a piggybacking question?
Yeah.
Because that's related to one of my questions, which is, so the school did not provide the testing for us. We went through the pediatrician's office.
Okay.
They provided the Vanderbilt.
The Vanderbilt, yep.
That went to a host of people in our quote unquote village, and he now has a diagnosis of ADHD.
Yep.
How do you, I've heard you can get the school to pay for the neuropsych evaluation because it's a very, very costly testing process.
They do their own. So any public school will have somebody that comes in that does their own testing, that does the neurological part of the testing. It's a psychologist that they have. And they will not pay for outside neurological testing. So if you go and see a neuropsych eval outside, that's on you. They do their own within the school system.
And every school does, that's like our school requirement.
It is a school requirement. Yep, they have to do a certain amount of testing. Now, for a diagnosis of ADHD, it doesn't guarantee you that you would get an IEP. It can guarantee you to have a 504, which is just for accommodations. And that's like accommodations of like having extra time for testing or more breaks, right? What the IEP does is allow them to have special education. So that's more of like those pullouts, different OT services, things like that. So they're looking at why is your child not thriving, right? And that's the difference. IEP doesn't mean you go through the process that you're 100% a shoo-in to get services. But a 504 with an ADHD diagnosis, you can have services, but they won't be services through the special ed department.
Got it. Thank you. That was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Kristen?
I'm also curious where
Above.
Could you recommend sources for parents that have their own struggles with executive functioning? Yes, I can. You can come see me anytime. But also, there's great information. Peg Dawson is an amazing person. She kind of, I don't want to say she started the wave of executive functioning. She piggybacked off of another woman. I actually met the first woman that produced the very first type of executive functioning like workbook. But Peg Dawson has a lot of great stuff. So I highly recommend you look on that. Is it Brighton Cork? There's another group out there that does a lot with executive functioning. But we do parent support for adults as well as adult coaching for executive functioning. And we do the same process that your kids go through, you go through. And let me tell you, it is eye-opening, because then you sit back and you're like, oh, that's where you got it from, right? And you're like, oh yeah, that's me, right? You don't want to like totally come out and admit it, and you're like, oh, maybe I should need to work on that too, because now you can see how it affects your kids too, right? And then also, Lisa says, I'm also curious where and how we can get a neuropsych done. Oh, sweet love. There is a massive wait list in the state of Maine. Right now, you're looking at anywhere between 18 months to 2 years to get a neuropsych eval. My favorite woman of all times is Courtney Hale. She does amazing neuropsych evals, but she is incredibly backed up. Right now, most people that I have worked with, and I work very closely with a lot of people from developmental behavioral pediatrics, they also have an incredibly long wait list. So some people are actually trying to go out of state in order to get a neuropsych eval. This is strictly because of COVID, but also what we saw from COVID is so many delays. And then the neuropsychs that were on for the time that COVID hit got pushed back, right? So we have this big backlog right now of people to do neuropsych evals. Some pediatricians have some inside people that they can refer to, but even with that, you're looking at anywhere between 9 to 18 months wait list currently, which is really, really sad in Maine. Sorry I can't give you any hope on this one, Lisa. I'm sorry. Any other questions out there?
if you were considering a private school for your child with ADHD, what are like 3 questions you would ask in the admissions process to understand if they're gonna be able to support your child better than?
That is a great question. One, what is their policy on movement? And how long is instruction time? And then my third is, what type of sensory diets can they provide in the classroom?
What do you mean by how long is instruction time?
So if you are giving an instruction for like 30 to 45 minutes and you have a student that has ADHD, there's no way that they're able to sit and focus for that long period of time. So when even in my high school, our lesson time, our instructional time, right, where you're sitting up talking and explaining, no more than 30 minutes. And for my middle school and elementary school, we're 10 to 20 minute instructional time. And then they're up moving, because I'm not sure if you've ever heard that, is if your butt isn't moving, then you're not focusing, right? Your body needs to move. The more you sit, I'm horrible in lectures, and I have had to sit through many. I am coloring, I am doodling, right? If I get my papers back from my students that have doodles all over it, I'm like, oh, that was a boring lecture, huh? That was a boring assignment. I'm sorry, dude, right? Like, that's my key, right? Because I've lost your attention. Sometimes doodling, though, is a way for them to focus, so that's okay too. But that's a really good question, because I think environment plays a key. I think the 4th one would be how much stimulation is in the environment, right? Because that creates that distractibility. Is there any other questions online that I can help with before we end tonight? Did you guys have any other questions? No? I'm going to pick on the only man in the room, in the audience, I should say, not in the room. My husband's in the room. Do you have any questions as dad?
Not that I can think of. Thank
No,
you for all
okay.
the info.
Well,
This is so helpful.
I'm glad, and I hope you guys leave tonight feeling hopeful. That's what I hope these seminars do for parents, because it's not a doomsday. Okay, it is beautiful. It might be challenging at times, but in the end, it's a journey, right? We didn't become parents because it was going to be easy. And that's the reason there's no rule book, right? There's no rule book on what's the right thing and the wrong thing to do. We just go by what comes natural to us. So if you guys need if you have any questions or want to talk further about any of this stuff, just give me a shout. I know that you'll get, oh, I'm sorry, Lisa, you did have one more question. I just got back from my ADHD autistic son's parent-teacher conference, and he is crushing it. See, that's right. Thank you for ending on that, Lisa. That's some great hope. Good job for your son. So please reach out if you need anything, if you have any questions, if you just want to sit and I can give you some resources. I'm happy to talk through email, talk on the phone, Zoom. So please don't feel like after you leave tonight, that was it. You're welcome to reach out. So thanks for coming, guys, and I hope this was really helpful for you guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And your little daughter is cute as stinking pie.
Thank you.
Oh my word, she's so adorable. And your little man that comes in, like he wasn't there. Oh, is he in the car today?
Yes. We went to the car wash today, so yeah.
Oh.
He's usually there building with Legos.
So
He builds buildings.
he built this building and
Yes.
he left it in there.
Yeah.
And you have to tell him, for the last week, everybody has said, wow, this is really good. So there was one boy today that came in for an assessment, and he was like, you need to save this. So I did set it off to the side because everybody has enjoyed it. So you tell him, he did a great job.
That's so
Well, thank you guys very
Thank
much
you.
for coming.
Super grateful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah.
I wanted to do more reading. This is,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I've touched on it. I'm a nurse or a full nurse practitioner, but so we've, touched on parts in psychology. We learned like very surface info, but I kind of want to read deeper, understand more, what's going on. Do you have any books, reading, anything that you would recommend?
I do. So I can email you those too. But there's a bunch of books out there